Welcome to this explainer. I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we are preparing to dig into something truly fascinating, the deeply layered history of the English nation. Think of it like a giant geological dig, but, instead of unearthing rocks and fossils, we're uncovering the layers of culture, customs, and language that literally build one of the most influential societies in modern history. We're going to look at the cultural stratigraphy of England.
Now, when we think of England, it's incredibly easy to picture this isolated, impenetrable island fortress standing completely alone against the world. But actually, that's a total myth. I want to challenge that idea right out of the gate. The truth, drawn straight from our source material, reveals a land that was constantly molded, reshaped, and redefined by incoming waves of migration and, well, outright conquest. So the big question we're tackling today is, how did an island shaped by constant invasion forge the most dominant language and culture in the modern world?
Here's our syllabus for today. 1. Foundations, Celts and Romans. 2. The Anglo-Saxon Germanic shift. 3. The Viking Age impact. 4. Norman conquest and French blend. 5. Forging the modern state. And 6. A legacy of blended language.
Okay, let's dive right into this and map out our chronological journey. We've got this really rapid succession of historical milestones. First, the Romans securing a foothold in 43 AD. Then, as their empire kind of crumbles, the Anglo-Saxons arrive in the 5th century. Fast forward a few hundred years, and the Vikings strike in 793 AD, and finally, the defining year of 1066 AD brings the Normans. Each one of these dates represents a massive tectonic shift in who the English people were and how they lived.
Section 1. Foundations, Celts and Romans.
Before we even talk about invasions, we have to talk about geography. Because 11,000 years ago, Britain wasn't an island at all. As the last glacial period ended, it was physically tethered to continental Europe by this low-lying land bridge known as Doggerland. And because of that physical connection, prehistoric peoples shared early farming practices, monument building, like Stonehenge, and eventually a widespread Celtic culture that blanketed Western Europe. It was only when melting ice sheets caused sea levels to rise that Britain was permanently cut off from the continent. But, as you'll see, that physical separation definitely didn't stop the rest of the world from coming to its shores.
The first major superpower to arrive was Rome. In 55 and 54 BC, Julius Caesar actually crossed the Channel but completely failed to establish a permanent foothold. Almost a century later, though, in 43 AD, Emperor Claudius succeeds. Rome brings almost all of modern England under its rule, cementing that first imperial layer of our stratigraphy. They founded major settlements you still hear about today, places like London, Chester, and York. They even built Hadrian's Wall to basically lock down their northern border. But empires don't last forever, do they? By 407 AD, facing threats from migrating barbarian tribes back on the continent, the Roman legions withdrew. They just left the Romano-British population to fend for themselves.
Section 2. The Anglo-Saxon Germanic shift. So, that Roman power vacuum? It led to a dramatic cultural replacement. Enter the Anglo-Saxons. They were a collection of Germanic tribes who initially arrived in the 4th and 5th centuries, most likely serving as mercenaries in the Roman army. But once the Romans left, they started settling in the eastern parts of the country in massive numbers. Now, whether this was by violent displacement or gradual acculturation, which historians actually still debate, the result was undeniable. They completely replaced the native Romano-British culture with their own Germanic ways of life. The native Britons were pushed out to the far west, into places like Wales and Cornwall. And the language these Anglo-Saxons introduced? It is the very root of the English language we're speaking right now.
Section 3. The Viking Age impact.
Picture this. Just as the Anglo-Saxons were finally settling into a series of kingdoms and converting to Christianity, a third major wave of transformation emerges directly from the sea. The late 8th century brought absolute terror to the coastline. In 793 AD, a shocking, brutal raid on the monastery of Lindisfarne officially kicks off the Viking Age. At first, it was just these hit-and-run attacks for treasure, but in 865 AD, everything changed. A massive force, literally recorded in history as the Great Heathen Army, pivoted from raiding to total conquest. They swallowed up the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms one by one until only Wessex remained. Then, in 878 AD, King Alfred the Great makes a miraculous last stand and actually halts their advance. Decades later, in 934 AD, his grandson Athelstan won a decisive battle that secured a unified English independence.
But here's the absolutely crucial point you need to take away from this. Even in victory, the English had to make massive concessions. They forced the Vikings back, sure, but they had to basically hand over the eastern lands to them. This region became known as the Danelaw. And because the Vikings occupied this land for generations, they permanently injected Old Norse vocabulary and customs straight into the local culture. It was yet another distinct, heavy layer added to the foundation.
Section 4. Norman Conquest and French Blend.
Now, what's really interesting is that the power shift in the year 1066 was absolute. The King of England died without an heir, which sparked a massive succession crisis. Duke William of Normandy crossed the Channel, and at the infamous Battle of Hastings, the English King Harold was killed, supposedly by an arrow right to the eye. William the Conqueror takes the throne. But he didn't just take the crown, he completely extinguished the Anglo-Saxon line of kings. As the Doomsday Book later recorded, practically the entire Anglo-Saxon nobility was wiped out and replaced with a newly installed Norman French aristocracy. From the top down, French became the language of the ruling elite. It forever altered the trajectory of the English state.
Following that conquest, England enters a highly chaotic medieval era defined by massive internal upheaval. We're talking 3 massive events that forced total socio-economic shifts. In 1215, powerful barons forced the king to sign the Magna Carta, effectively slashing the monarch's absolute power. Then, a biological invasion arrives, the Black Death in 1348, which eradicated an estimated half of the entire population. Just think about that scale. This drastic reduction in manpower actually gave the surviving peasants leverage, leading to the Peasants' Revolt in 1381 over unfair taxes and wages. The cultural foundation was literally cracking and shifting under immense pressure.
Section 5. Forging the Modern State.
Let's move to the 15th century and see how these internal struggles build directly toward the modern era. The nobility falls into this brutal 30-year civil war known as the War of the Roses. It was the House of Lancaster, symbolized by the red rose, against the House of York, symbolized by the white rose. This relentless fighting only ends when Henry Tudor, from the Lancastrian line, defeats King Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485. This single victory established the famous Tudor dynasty, which finally began to stabilize the war-ravaged economy and unify the entire nation.
And once things stabilized, the progression was just insanely rapid. Henry VIII triggered a massive religious upheaval by splitting from the Catholic Pope and establishing his own Protestant Church of England, mostly just so he could get a divorce to secure a male heir. His daughter, Queen Elizabeth I, managed to cool those tensions, overseeing a golden age of art and commerce and famously defeating the Spanish Armada in 1588. Though the 17th century saw further turmoil with the English Civil War in 1642, which, fun fact, briefly turned the country into a republic, the monarchy was eventually restored. By 1707, the Acts of Union officially merged the English and Scottish parliaments, creating the Kingdom of Great Britain. The stage was now perfectly set for the Industrial Revolution and the expansion of a vast global empire.
Section 6. A legacy of blended language.
So we've covered thousands of years of invasions, plagues, and civil wars. Now let's bring it all back to our core thesis and examine the absolute most enduring artifact of this chaotic, layered history. As this brilliantly illustrates, the English language isn't just one thing. It's a direct reflection of every single invader that crossed the Channel. We've got a slice of Roman Latin. We've got the foundational base of Anglo-Saxon Germanic. We have the rugged vocabulary of Viking Old Norse from the Danelaw. And we have the sophisticated terminology imposed by the Norman French aristocracy. The very words we use to communicate today are literally the archaeological remains of these past conquests.
I really want to highlight this specific takeaway from our source material. England's language is a result of the constant evolution and adaptability of its speakers. You see, the true survival of English culture didn't rely on repelling every invader, because let's be honest, they didn't. Its survival lay in its incredible capacity to absorb its conquerors. It took the customs, the laws, and the vocabularies of every group that arrived and blended them into something entirely new and incredibly resilient. Which leaves us with this final thought. Think about the words you use every single day, the words you're hearing me say right now. If every English sentence is built from the remnants of ancient migrations, what history are you speaking right now? It's a powerful reminder that history isn't just locked away in textbooks or museums. It's alive, it's adapting, and it's rolling off our tongues every single time we speak. Thank you so much for joining me to explore the cultural stratigraphy of England. I really hope you're walking away with a fresh perspective on how migration and conflict shape the very way we communicate.